these kind of things. So Steve, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're very pleased. So, my name is Scott. I'm the Community and Adult Services Librarian here. And I'm here to introduce, this is Steve Hirst. He's going to tell us a little bit about his amazing story. They have books for sale as well, so make sure you pick one of those up before you leave. And thanks for everyone for coming.
Hi, I'm Steve Hirst. I used to live on Kent. I went to Whitefish High and then the Air Force Academy. I was flying up in Alaska when I had my crash. I didn't flying driving my car. So I had a crash. I swam on black ice and hit my head on the window and I ran into a telephone pole. And this is my wife, and my daughter, Stacey. We have one other daughter, Stephanie, who lives in Alabama now.
So I'm Susan, Steve's wife. We've been married a little over 30 years now. And how Steve came to write a book, I want to share just a little bit of that with you. Steve, as most of you know, if you didn't know him or his family already from the articles or the publicity that's happened, was born and raised here in Whitefish Bay and has just a huge affinity to the community and a great pride in where he's from. And he left, however, when he joined the Air Force, and as the military takes you, where you go where the military sends you, we made our homes across the country and outside of the country for several years before his car accident. Following that, we moved to Colorado, which is my home, and that was really designed so that I could have the support to help Steve, knowing that we were going to provide for Steve everything he needed and he would be taken care of, and I was being a little selfish and looking for where am I going to get the help. So we moved to Colorado Springs, which is a wonderful military community. There's a lot of opportunities. I was also in the military and able to continue my career near family so that we could take care of Steve and raise our daughters who were they were in grade school, 9 and 10 when Steve was injured. Well, as soon as he was able to really communicate, and it took some time, it was a good year before he was speaking maybe in more sentences or being able to translate to others what was going on in his mind and his reflections. And he immediately said he wanted to write a book, and we thought that was about as far out of any realm of possibility as you could get. But as soon as he was able to kind of get on a computer and henpack, he began jotting down his notes or keeping a daily journal. And the journal went for years. He had an editor that, in fact, I was away on business, and his mother, Mag Hirst, was there taking care of the kids, and somehow Steve got connected with a gentleman who wanted to help him, and I came home to find out he had signed a contract and promised money, and here we were, writing a book. Now that didn't really materialize, but it did set up a website, and it did get him to have a goal or an end state, and to provide the thoughts, to take what was happening in his life or what he was experiencing and to document it. And so for several years he kept a journal, and the journal was a lot of complaints and a few happy times. And I think the brain injury itself, if you have become familiar with a traumatic brain injury, it really does alter your perception of society and of the world around you, and anything that messes with your mind is a challenge in and of itself. So I would say fortunately, it was his sounding board versus complaining all the time to the family. But after several years, the frustration of not having this book that he had planned to write come to fruition had gotten to him to where he was reaching out anywhere he could. And another Whitefish Bay friend and alum, Ann Ryan, her father was a doctor, I think, here in the area, but Ann Ryan Solomon, through Facebook, so our social media connection, said she wanted to get involved. And she is a writer by trade and works in the industry. So Steve hired Ann as his editor, and they made it legal, took it all into the reality, and they used another Whitefish Bay alum, Chris Reardon, to be the legal mind behind making this contractual aspect. And together, they took a compilation of notes that was endless and said, how do we present this to share Steve's story and to make it interesting to a vast audience. And the way that they did it is to ask for some inputs from others. And if you haven't read the book, if you have, you'll know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, what you're going to find as you go through it is that there are writings from associates of Steve's in his Air Force career. There is entries from when he talks about his military experiences. Then there are notes, contributing notes from others, and it includes the former Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who Steve was flying with when he got what is called the fighter pilot tack sign, or their call sign, a nickname that every fighter pilot has, usually because of something they did that you might want to rib them for the rest of their lives. So it's not always something that you say, this is because of all the great things they've done. Except for yours. Do you want to tell what your name is?
My nickname is Blaster. It happened because I was in a shelter in Korea, and I wasn't familiar with what things were in the shelter. And I blew out of the shelter with my power. And there were people around with their equipment, Hussies with their equipment, and I blew out. And I stopped when they told me to.
Yeah, so he blasted it. The people and the equipment around him, he was from thence called Blaster. If you end up being a friend of his on Facebook or for his book, you will see people that refer to him as Blaster. That is his name in the Air Force.
You don't have to call me that. You can call me Steve, and that's really fine with me.
Yeah, so to all of you, he's still Steve. There are contributions from an Air Force doctor who has a specialty that he focused on TBI. So there is the medical aspect on how TBI affects individuals, how it affects family. And so he creates reflections or assessments after a chapter. He has quite a bit from friends here in Whitefish Bay, people he grew up with, that lent to it. There's a lot of stories about Whitefish Bay and really the idyllic lifestyle and rearing that Steve had here. And Stacey and I, just yesterday, as we were going through the parade, and we've been here year after year, but it was a different feel yesterday. I think we're watching it from another perspective. And we said we just don't think there's a whole lot of places like Whitefish Bay that exist where a community is so cohesive, and that you can go to a parade and a park and people will spend all day in community with one another, and you're really just neighbors. That builds a bond that we can now understand better when Steve talks about it, or when his friends call, what the reference is, and kind of just what a great opportunity living here was for him. And I think that's reflected a lot in the stories that are told, and then the reflections from his friends, from Lonnie Lave, Hagerup, yes, and Chris Reardon, and Steve Ulick. And Chris Hagerup, yes. And then there are family. What having a traumatic brain injury has been like as a father, as a husband. And in that, then, I think some of the parts that might have been difficult for me is I'm a contributor in the book, kind of from a different perspective, and it's not all pretty. You know, it's a little revealing, and both our other daughter and I, not Stacey so much, she is a little more accommodating and cooperative in this, but our other daughter and I, we were both very tentative about, are we comfortable with this being out where people that we know or don't know we're gonna reveal a little more of what we think and what we feel and how we responded. And as I said, it's not all pretty, and I think traumatic brain injury itself it's not pretty. It's a very sad and debilitating injury that is dubbed as the silent epidemic, because there are people, not as Steve is. Steve is very obvious. There's no question Steve has been injured and that there is a brain association to it. But there are people with traumatic brain injury that you would not know they have one. They walk, they talk, they appear to be unaffected and normal, but there are things in their behavior that are not as socially acceptable or normal, and so they're sometimes diminished or scorned. And a little bit of Steve's book is to help maybe just the general reader that those that are disabled or those that are different have much to offer, but also have a lot of the same ability to be hurt, to be marginalized, and to maybe open up the aperture that we just, kind of accept society in general a little more open, a little more friendly, and with more patience.
I'll never forget the time I was driving my chair into a power chair home. I was driving it up a street where there was a parking lot, and I was driving up to the ramp with the concrete, the sand down, and the guy came by behind. He spun up and parked right in front of the ramp, and I got very angry, and he knew it, but I turned around and went back a different way.
Yeah, I think the brain injury aspect, what Steve will say, and I think in one of the articles or the radio show, is that he was very calm, at least I think he was. I didn't know him as a child, but he was a pretty slow to anger individual. He has changed dramatically. Something is done wrong, and it's an immediate. He has to take a lot of effort to tamper down that emotion and to prevent himself from kind of going over the top and behaving in ways that are not acceptable in a general population. And that's a bit of what the brain injury does with the flashpoint. It can really speed up that anger.
So
yes.
you were indicating that, it impacts, everybody gets a different impact from this, but are the, like this doctor in the Air Force there who's working on this, is he able to, by seeing some of the actions of Steve, to say to you, now these are other things that you can anticipate? Am I making any, does that make some sense?
It does. This doctor particularly was a doctor in his flying squadron. So he was a flight doctor, and his later has been in this. So he's a contributor here. So not him specifically, but others, when Steve was in his therapies, because of the prevalence of brain injury now across, they are able to share what we might expect and what is normal within an injured brain, and what you can't do is necessarily fix it, but you can work on tools to identify and try to change the situation. And so yes, there is some of that. I think the advancements are yet to come, really, of what's going to happen. And Steve is maybe an early recipient of this affliction, if we want to call it.
Right.
But because of the many servicemen and women that are coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq with brain injury, they call it these wars signature injury, that we overall are learning so much of the brain and the advancements that can take place. And though Steve personally won't benefit from those, I think he has benefited by being a part of a community that is very supportive. Whether it be his home community, the military itself, and then, we're kind of, I don't know if we're just determined people, but a brain injury is really hard on a family, and most families, in statistics, cannot stay intact. And we are definitely not a perfect family. We're about as far from perfect as any family could get, I would say. But
Me and you.
yeah, you and I. Yeah, we're pretty far from that. But the fact that we are together, I think, is good for both of us. It's good for Steve because he has something that maybe a lot of brain injuries don't. Many are younger than he was. They may never have had a family. They don't get to experience, being parents after a brain injury. And then again, they're many times marginalized to the point they might be institutionalized, or they are living in group-type settings where their experiences, I think, may stifle overall life value. And the future, I think, is better for people that will experience similar injuries in the future. But in this, Steve is maybe on the leading edge of those that will have better outcomes, and there's more knowledge and acceptance and recognition of.
I apologize. I haven't read the book yet.
No, don't apologize.
But was there any indication by them at one point in time saying, you may have to consider institutionalizing or not?
Well, The professionals Steve was in Alaska initially, and then after he was stabilized and we could move, we were to choose where to go. And he needed to go to either a military hospital or a VA hospital. And there were 5 that were principal brain injury or primary brain injury facilities, Minnesota VA being one. We went there because it had, from the little research or help we could do, and it all happened so fast, you know, I mean, one day everything's fine, 4 weeks later you're looking for a permanent type of rehab facility. But we went to Minneapolis because it was deemed as the best of all of the options that we had. No one there said anything about institutionalizing him. So the professionals that studied it did not. We did move then to Colorado, and we tried to live on the military base where we were being stationed, and the base commander, who was a colonel, did not want us to live on the base because the base didn't have an emergency room, and it didn't have as the military has adjusted and shifted, they had gotten rid of their hospital, they had gotten rid of the emergency room. So they said, well, what if something happens? We can't respond to him. And I had said, well, what if something happens downtown? No matter what, you have to have someone come. So I was, you know, we won that battle with some intervention, and we lived on base. But in getting to that point, that particular individual suggested that Steve be institutionalized. And he was a senior officer to me, and for a while I was kind of intimidated by that. I was a major at the time, and he was a colonel, and I kind of thought for a minute that I didn't have the ability to decide for my family what was happening. Now, we never actually figured we were going to do that, but it was suggested from someone who had a lot of influence, and I was surprised by that, and that was really just by reading medical records, never having met Steve. And then what happened from that is we had to go in every 3 months to tell him how things were going, and I think after 2 visits, I decided I wasn't going to go see this man anymore. He didn't have any business telling me or my family what to do, that I probably would know best. And I think I saw him 6 months later at the gym, and he said, I haven't seen you for a while. And I said, oh, no, haven't seen you, and left. But he was really the only individual.
So now you stayed on active duty then the whole?
For 21 years, yeah.
Now how long was that after the accident?
When he had his accident, I had 12 years.
Okay,
so I stayed for 9 more.
Wow.
And the Air Force, you know, despite that incident and that individual, the Air Force was exceptionally accommodating to us. I was able to do 3 assignments in Colorado Springs, getting wonderful jobs, being able to be promoted, but staying intact with my family. And so they, you know, normally when they move you around instead, it was a complete deference to our situation. And I didn't have to leave when I did. It just made sense. There was a good opportunity, civilian in the same area, and I didn't have to think that anyone...
So you stayed, then afterwards you continued?
I do exactly the same thing, but I wear a suit. In the same phone number. Yeah, so...
Okay.
Yeah, so the military, I think that should Steve had had such an injury, and either of us were in any other kind of profession, we may not have had the opportunities or the support professionally that we had to be able to normalize a life as much as we've been able to.
But it's more, now maybe I'm off base here, but it's almost more that you were still in the military as opposed to Steve, because he had to, I mean... Right,
for the later part it's because I was still in the military, but when Steve had his accident, his squadron, and that's the Air Force was divided down into squadrons as the lower level, his squadron commander and wife met Steve and our 2 dogs, I mean not Steve, he was in the hospital, Stephanie, Stacey, and I, as well as Mag. Mag, Steve's mom, was in Alabama taking care of the girls. I was on a trip in Canada, and I had just gotten home. The 4 of us then got on a plane the next day, flew to Alaska. They met us at the airport, and every day for those near 30 days in Alaska, someone from his squadron picked us up in the morning, took us to the hospital, picked us up in the evening, took us home, had food there for us in the temporary house we were in, took the girls on adventures so that they didn't have to stay in a hospital all day, then helped to get them enrolled in school. And then they had medical people standing by. If Steve were, you know, initially they didn't know whether he would make it through the night and through the next few days. So there was someone standing by prepared to retire him. So they had the paperwork unsigned to retire him and continue, you know, his medical being alive long enough to officially retire him, because the benefits for the family would be better if he were retired. They didn't sign them prematurely so that should he be able to recover, they wouldn't have retired someone that actually could continue. So in that sense, that part was all about him. And then what they did is they put him on what was called after 6 months, he was on the temporary disability retirement list. And it's a TDRL, and that said, we're going to retire you temporarily as a retirement benefits, but we're keeping the option open to return to active duty should your medical condition change. And so that stayed intact for a year, and then they did a permanent medical retirement. Okay. So, you know, I can't say anything except for good about the situation on both sides. He was taken care of, which took care of the family, and then I was taken care of, which took care of the family. And that's just luck.
Yeah, probably being good people too. I mean, being.
Thank you.
I think there's I mean, I really do. I believe that good people end up with good stories, or have the potential of having better stories at the end from that standpoint. I think, you know.
But I would like to think that we're good people. That would be nice.
We're so fortunate to have her, my two kids.
Yep.
They were great. And in the Air Force, she was the one who put her foot down when she needed and her eyes when she needed.
Any other questions? Yes.
Steve played basketball here at Whitefish Bay.
I didn't recognize
Is it true you didn't play lick of defense at all?
Your opinion was I didn't play. Right, even when I played at Utah, I didn't play.
So Steve's coach.
Let me add this about Susan. When this first happened with Steve, he was in a hospital in Minneapolis, and Sue was in an Air Force base down in Alabama, and she worked Monday through Friday. They had 2 little kids, and every weekend she flew up to Minneapolis to be with Steve, and then did that time and time again. She's been by Steve's side forever. She's been an absolute saint. I mean, you read that, you know, till death do us part, and better or worse, Susan's just been wonderful. I haven't said enough about her. She's been wonderful.
I still believe a word you say.
Well, thank you. So when you read the book, some of the things you're not going to think I'm such a saint. I'm not. Yeah, and that's another part. We did try in the book. We were a little forthright, and there's honesty in it. And in retrospect, I think that's a little bit of the value of it. A lot of times we try to sugarcoat our lives, and you get Christmas letters. They don't tell all about the bad things that happened all year, or the reality that's there. They say all of the highlights, and so there's a little bit of the book. It's going to say we're kind of normal with warts, and maybe we're not so good, and I'm not so nice, and he's not so nice. He's pretty nice, but the rest of us might be a little less than perfect, right?
So for the kids, what was the most challenging thing for them?
Stacey?
Well, I mean, every time that they talk about this, there's things that I learned. Like, I didn't know she was going every 3 months to meet this man. Like I think overall, my sister and I had fairly normal I mean, maybe not normal, but I think we did a lot of things that is pretty surprising considering, my mom was kind of recovering from having her husband injured so badly, and my dad, wasn't able to be a father at the time. But I think for me, the hardest thing was just like friends and people like wondering what was wrong with my dad, or why our family was this way. And it's pretty interesting to have these parents walk, be at a basketball game where people don't necessarily they would see them, but maybe not think that was my dad, or think all these different things. So I think for me, it was just other people's perceptions, and I think I think of everyone, I care a lot more about what people think of us, and if we're arguing, or if people's tempers are hot, and yelling at each other, and I'm don't want to be associated with them, or but I'm also part of it. So I think just other people's perceptions initially, as a younger kid, and then just,
So are you a hoops player too then?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah, I kind of ruined that for him and his kids.
We didn't get much of the hype, so. But I think also, I was really close with my dad as a kid, and so I think I don't think I necessarily mourned the change of that relationship initially. I kind of waited, I was just waiting for it to go back to normal. And I think, I don't know when we
Liberty in Stacey's presence. So we have the two daughters, and they're a year and a half apart. Stephanie is older. Neither of them are really old, but Stephanie's now 28 today. Today, yeah. And she's going to have a baby in 2 weeks, or she would be here with us. So that will be her first grandchild, yeah. But Stephanie, when we were in Alaska, every day we went into the hospital, and both girls would say good morning to Steve. And every night, both girls would say good night to him. And during the day, they were, after a couple days, they were off doing adventures that others took care of for him. Well, Stephanie had no problem. I mean, she cried the day that we heard it. We were scared, we were nervous, but every day she'd go in and she would just talk up a storm with him, tell him what she did during the day, tell him she loved him. Stacey said, I'll wait till he wakes up. I'll wait till he wakes up. And we made her go in, which in retrospect, I don't know if that was the right or wrong thing to do, and I wouldn't be able to tell anyone. But she went in, and so she'd say, good morning, Dad. She'd leave. And she'd come in at the end, and she'd say, I love you, good night. But she really wanted to wait, and I think that's what she said, taking the time to really accept what was happening. It was two different children with two very different experiences and approaches and makeup. And it probably was 6 years before Stacey was able to say, I've got to get on with something new with my father. And she came and told us, I don't really like him. I don't know if you remember that. And this isn't okay. And she wanted to talk to someone, so she went and had some talk therapy, and it didn't take her long at all. It was kind of like she had to acknowledge that it was okay to not be happy with the situation. Where her sister could yell and scream right away and be angry, and thought that was okay. Stacey somehow didn't like it, and that might be a little bit of the not liking it when we're in public and we snip at each other, or when we meet a person at the store and not even have to do with a brain injury, but someone's helping you, and I argue with, well, that's not right, and she's like, do you need to do that? Can you let it go? But as it's turned out, Stephanie is in the Air Force. She's a captain in the Air Force. She's married to another captain in the Air Force. They both went to the Air Force Academy, as did Steve and I. Stacey is working with adults with developmental disabilities and now headed for a master's in public health. So I think the things that happened in that life influenced both of them in though there's a lot about them that's similar, they picked different paths, but that are very much influenced by, like all other children, by the families that they're raised in, by the experiences that they have. And they have a lot of compassion. They're both doing service work, but from different ends of the spectrum. Yes?
I'd just like to say a couple of words. I went to school with Steve, and I remember what he was like in high school as a basketball player. Now, my name's John Harrigan. I read your book, and I loved it. I absolutely loved your book. And I was so angry that I missed the parade yesterday, but I so much wanted to see you because I read your book, and it was a true inspiration to me. But I also wanted to just make a few comments and just kind of interrupt everything and just tell you about my observations of you in high school. Steve was a really, even back in grade school, he went to a different grade school than I did, but I remember hearing about him being this outstanding basketball player. And
Sir, could you tell him about?
When he was a sophomore in high school.
He played soft football with us. We had a wonderful year. We were 17-1 then. And then Steve he ran track, he ran hurdles, and he played football, defensive back, and he was a very good basketball player. He made second team all conference as a junior. First game of his senior year, he's going in for layup. Guy pushed him down, fell and broke his wrist. And he played maybe 2 games at the end of the year. That was his whole season. And they didn't have AAU league then, so there's nobody, if you didn't play your senior year basketball.
Yeah.
Northwestern, if you're interested in it, we talked to them, and that didn't work out, but then Air Force worked out. And Steve went there and had a nice career, done some wonderful things. But it truly was one of the more talented players you're right.
And I'm not a great judgment of talent, but I could just see he was an exceptional ball handler. And but also, more than that, the guy could shoot. And I remember him first getting into his first varsity game, or one of his first varsity games, and him taking these shots from downtown. And I was thinking, what are you doing? You know, and they hit the bottom of the net, you know. And there was no three-point rule at that time. But he just wasn't afraid to take these shots from downtown, and he would drill these shots because the defense, they were letting him shoot from that. Well, by halftime, you know, the defense had adjusted, and they were covering him from way back, you know, because they knew this guy was a pure shooter. And I remember him even shooting baskets with Mike Brand, playing horse. And, you know, and it just seemed like he was always just drilling these shots from way downtown, okay? The other thing that I remember about Steve is that he really carried himself, was very, not very outspoken, very kind of quiet, not a, very reserved, and didn't really talk a lot about his, you know, accomplishments or what a great athlete he was, or, you know, he just kind of told his story by his play. His play, his basketball play, and how he acted in front of others, really told people about who he was as a person, which spoke volumes. And that's it. I've always looked up to him for that. You know, he could have been, there were other players on the team that were very arrogant, you know, and really wanted the attention. There were good players, not as good as Steve. But Steve wasn't like that. He just knew how to carry himself at a very early age, and just let his play do his talking for him. You know, and that's what I remember. So I apologize for interrupting.
Okay, go ahead and again.
No, but I am so glad to have been able to see you after having read your book.
Thank you.
And it's been a true inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, if it wants help, we can go over to this and sign books.
So Steve would be happy to, you know, sign a book for you. Also, if you have other questions or you just want to talk to him, he does have a Fans of Still Standing page on Facebook, if you want to add any comments. But we're really happy that you were able to take some time out of your day to come and share it with us and to support Steve. Appreciate it very much.
Likewise, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.